All right, so this is a hybrid workshop. So we have about 50-50 folks in the room and folks online right now. If you're in the room, feel free to ask questions at any time if you need help. If you're online, you could put your questions in the chat if you'd like, or if you want to unmute yourself to ask a question, that is fine too. We should be able to hear you in the room, but I'll keep an eye on the chat as well. We are going to jump right in. So make sure if you're planning on following along today that you have Photoshop open on your computer. And I have a shared folder. That's what this short URL is for that you see on the screen. For folks online, that short URL is also posted in the chat. That will take you to a folder with some images, lots of images for you to download on your computer so you can use them in the workshop today. So if you have that short URL open and you're in the folder, go ahead and download the practice images so that they're on your computer. And there are some activities we're going to do in the second half of the workshop, and the instructions for that are in there as well. I think there are about 10 practice images, and we're going to be going through using several of those. And of course, you're always welcome to just sit back and enjoy and watch while I go through today. But I encourage you to follow along if you'd like, because the best way to learn Photoshop is to actually be clicking along as we go. Before we start, I'd love to see hands, whether online or in the room. How many of you have used Photoshop before? All right, we have 3 hands up in the room, and I see about half of us online, or a little more than half. Awesome. Okay, so I think we're about 50-50 today. And I'm assuming the rest of you, have you ever opened it before, or this is your first time touching it? Awesome. Okay, fantastic. Lots of newbies. Fantastic. Well, Photoshop is a great program. Let's talk about what it can do. What might you want to use Photoshop for? Photoshop, you can hear it in the name. A lot of the reason people use Photoshop is for photos, whether you are trying to edit a photo, manipulate a photo in some way. Many people use it to create entire new images. And I'll show you a little bit what I mean by that when we jump into the program. So a lot of graphic designers use the program. A lot of photo editors use the program because it is very powerful when it comes to editing and retouching and manipulating photographs. But you can also use it to create graphics. You can use it to create digital art. So there are a lot of uses. I guess I'll tell you guys a little bit about myself too before we get started. Sorry, I haven't introduced myself yet. My name is Katie Edmiston. I work here in the library. I don't have a vast amount of experience in all the Adobe programs. I mean, there's 40 plus of them, so it's hard to be an expert in all of them. I have been teaching a lot of workshops on campus on Adobe Express, which is a nice beginner-friendly program, and I recognize a lot of you from those workshops. So this is our Level Up workshop because we're going into more of a high quality professional program now as far as what Photoshop can do. I have about 5 years of experience working in Photoshop. You will find people who have 10 to 15 to 20 years of experience in this program who are still learning new things. It is constantly evolving and changing. Adobe is always adding new features and making it better. But also, because there are so many things you can do with this program, you could use it for 10 years as a photo editor and have only touched half of the tools because there's all these other aspects of the program that can be used in different ways. And the reason I like to point that out to people is just to say to to not let yourself get too overwhelmed by everything that you don't know, because even people who use it all the time, there's lots in the program that they don't know. And you can always look something up and learn. And I'm still doing that all the time because I don't know how every single tool works. But we're going to give you a nice intro to the basics today. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to jump into the program. So let me pull up Photoshop on my end. All right, folks online, can I see a thumbs up that you can see Photoshop on my screen? That's a thumbs up. Thank you. Okay, so here we are on the home page for Photoshop. You might have some pop-ups, you know, maybe a box or two that's blocking some of this, so feel free to X out of any pop-up boxes. Especially if you're new to the program, you'll often see little pop-ups of Photoshop trying to tell you what's new and what have they added. So don't be surprised if you see those again. Here on our homepage, you've got your little welcome screen. Just a few buttons here because we don't spend a lot of time on the homepage. From here, you're either going to start a new file, or you can open a project that already exists or open an image to start editing. So these two buttons are the main way you would start a new project. But you'll also notice there's a little drag and drop here as well. If you knew there was a photo you wanted to edit, you could drag and drop it in. I am going to follow my own advice and download all of those images very quickly here onto my computer so we can get started. So let's try starting a new project. I'd like you all to see what this process looks like. So on your Photoshop home screen, go ahead and click on New File. And you should see this little new document box pop up. Did you have a question? Oh, sure. Short URL is, you got it, Claire? Hey, thank you. And if glitches come up, folks, and it will happen, feel free to interrupt me, let me know. We have folks in the room who can help you as well, so we'll get back on track. Okay, so we all can see our new document box here, and Photoshop is really nice. It does give us some default sizes. So for example, if I knew I wanted to work on a photo project, I could go over to this little photo tab and choose from some default sizes here. Same if I know that I want to create something for web or for print, lots of preset document sizes. But a lot of the time we might have a specific dimension in mind. And so this little menu on the right side here is where you can put in your dimensions. And to start, I'm going to have you guys, we're going to just create a 5 by 5 inch canvas. This drop down here will let you change to inches. So if your program shows pixels, you can change that over to inches. And we'll create something that's 5 by 5. Obviously, there are a lot of other settings in here, and we are not going to worry about those right now. Just make sure your dock is set to 5 by 5 width and height, and then you can go ahead and hit create. So our new screen that you all are seeing is the Photoshop workspace. So this is where the magic happens. And when you are in Photoshop, this is where you're going to be 99% of the time. And we have a lot going on. So I'm going to give you guys a little tour to start. And we'll try not to take too long with our tour, but there are lots of different important areas in the workspace. And I want you all to know what everything is, where everything is. Now, what I'll say from the start is if your workspace looks different from mine, that is not unusual because Photoshop is extremely customizable. You can create a workspace with exactly the tools that you always use that you want. However, for the sake of this workshop, I'm going to have us all have the same settings. So go ahead and at the top, you see a menu at the top here for Photoshop. Open up the window menu. And you guys will see second from the top, this option here for your workspace. There are different workspaces in Photoshop. You'll notice there's a photography workspace and a painting workspace. Basically, what each of these is, if you switch to, let's switch to photography, for example, our screen changes a little bit. Not a lot, but you might have noticed that the panels on the right side changed. Some of the tools might have changed. So the different workspaces are going to show you different tools and windows that are most useful. Most of you guys should have been on the Essentials default. So that's the workspace we're going to be working in today. Okay, no problem. Okay, thank you. So go to Workspace and select Essentials Default. And if you've never touched Photoshop before, that should mean that you see the same thing as me. If you still see something different, open up that Workspace tab again and just click on the Reset Essentials button, and that will reset your workspace to the default settings. So for the most part, you should see some of the same options as me now. Now let's start with the menu. You guys already clicked into here already. So along the top, we have our menu bar. You can access lots of different sections here like File, Edit, Image. We're going to be in and out of some of these menus as we're working today. Just under the menu is our control panel. So this control panel changes based on the tool you have selected. So you might see additional settings or things that you can change in the control panel. And you also see the home button here. So if you ever need to get back to that home page to start a new project, you can click on that. We're back to home. And I'm going to click on our arrow again to go back into the workspace. Let's see how that control panel changes by selecting some different tools. On the left side, you should see your toolbar. Lots and lots of tools. We have many options here. You can click the arrows to customize whether your toolbar shows up as one long strip or as a double strip. And you can actually move this wherever you want. Remember how I said it's fully customizable, so you can put things where you want. All right, so let's, for example, click on the paintbrush tool. And our control panel changed. We have new options here for things like our brush size, what type of paintbrush we're using. Is it transparent? Is the opacity at 100 or something lower? So as you click on different tools, you'll notice that control panel change. Quick note about our toolbar. Do you guys see the little arrows next to some of our tools in the bottom right corner? That means that there are more tools hiding just below. So if you click and hold on that tool, you'll see a full list. There are so many tools in Photoshop that they can't even show them all at once. So for example, if you couldn't see the brush tool, it might have been hiding under the pencil tool. And you'll also notice that if you hover your mouse over a tool, it will tell you what the tool is and what it does. So this is really handy when you're new to the program, trying to figure out what's what. That is our toolbar. And on the right side are some window panels. Now these change based on your choice of what you want to see open or not. Right now, the top half, you should see color, swatches, gradients, patterns, and you can flip through these windows. Just below that, you should see properties, adjustments, and libraries. And if you don't see all of these, it's okay. Once again, anything you hover over, Photoshop will tell you what it is. The properties window is very important. So make sure you see where properties is. And I recommend always having as a default that one open because properties is going to have a lot of additional tools and settings and things for every tool or action you're working on. And you can make these windows larger or smaller. If you hover on the line in between the panels, your cursor will change and you can adjust those. So our last panel, and it might be at the very bottom for you, you should see layers, channels, and paths. And go ahead and click on layers to open it up and make sure that you can see inside of it. Layers is very important. And we'll talk a little bit more about layers in just a moment. But I always recommend having, for the most part, properties open and layers open. You want to see those pretty much all the time because they're very useful. Sorry, I'm just arranging my screen, trying to decide where I want things. There we go. All right. Now in the middle, we have our canvas. We set it to 5 by 5, and you should just be seeing a blank white screen. And lastly is our little toolbar in the center of the page here. This is called the contextual toolbar. That's a really hard word to say. This is a recent addition in Photoshop. Basically, all this little toolbar is you will sometimes see, depending on what tool you have selected or different options you have selected, the options here might change. And it's basically just a quick access bar. So you may end up using it, you might not, but just so you know what this is, if you don't like having it in the middle center of your screen, you can always move it over wherever you'd like. How are we feeling about our workspace? Guys, see all the different sections? Awesome. All right. A few more things I will point out. The window panels over here, I mentioned that you can change these however you'd like. And there are lots of windows that actually aren't open. And you can see all of them in the Windows menu. So if you guys open up your window menu, you should see a long list here. And several of these have check marks next to them because they're open currently in our workspace. And you can see there are a ton more panels here that may or may not be open. And if you select one, it will pop up on the right side of your screen. So you control your window panels. You can choose the things you want open or that you want to get rid of. And if you're ever missing something, like if I closed the properties panel and now it's gone, you can always get it back by going to Window, find it in the list, and reopen it. Okay, let's very briefly go into our Windows menu, and I want you to open one additional panel, which is the History window. And I like to point out the History panel to folks because what the History panel is a timeline of your entire project from start to finish. So very quickly here, I'm just going to add some things to my canvas. I'm going to add some text. I'm going to paint. And you don't have to follow along and do this. I just want to show you what this looks like. So you can see with each action I've done, my history panel is growing and it's showing me my different actions. And if at any point I decided I want to undo the work I've done, I can really quickly back up to any point in the document just by clicking. So it's like a living, breathing timeline of your project. One thing you guys will learn about Photoshop is that it's very common to make changes and make edits that you then want to undo. Happens all the time. So you guys are going to very quickly memorize the undo actions. And so the history panel is one way to quickly jump around different states of your project. The other way we can undo, I just closed the history panel by clicking the double arrows there, but it lives here now, so you can always reopen it. The other way we undo is using, you can go to the edit menu and there's an undo button there, but you'll notice that there is a keyboard shortcut, and that is Control Z. That is, I think historically Control Z is usually undo in many programs, so maybe you know that one already. But here on my canvas, if you hold on your keyboard Control Z, it will undo. Every time you tap Control Z, it will undo a change. And if you got rid of something you don't want, you can redo it. Question? Great question. So question was about if the history tab remains after you save. The history tab, before I answer your question, it will save up to 50 actions. There is a you can go into your preferences and adjust how many actions it saves up to 1,000, but that will take up a lot of memory on your computer. So it defaults to your last 50 actions. And it's so now I believe you can't, once you do a save, I believe, and close it and come back, I don't think you can go back in your history. So there's an additional feature in here. This is kind of advanced, but you can create a snapshot for your history panel with this little camera, and it will save your project where you're at in time, and that will save in there for you. So again, that's kind of advanced, but that's a great question when you're thinking about editing and things. Yes. Well, don't worry. We'll talk a bit more about this concept that you're talking about of how do I undo changes or make sure that I'm not editing things I might want to adjust later. We'll talk all about that, so don't worry. Great question. Okay. So I showed you guys the history panel. We were talking about undo. So go ahead and practice that if you haven't already. Maybe use the paintbrush and paint on your canvas, and then practice doing the Control Z, just so you can see how that feels. You'll want to get used to it because undo is something you're going to use a lot. I see a question in the chat about if you can undo out of order. No, you cannot. So you guys noticed when I want to undo the text, if I'm going to use Control Z, since I painted after I added the text, I have to undo that first before I can undo my type. Now there are ways to get around that, and we'll talk about that. But just keep in mind, if you're using Control Z, it does have to be in order. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about layers. So there's a very important aspect of Photoshop, something we call non-destructive editing. And that's a big concept behind a lot of the questions you guys have already asked me. You know, how do I go back to a previous step? How do I delete something without undoing everything else? Layers is a big part of how you can do that in Photoshop. Now you could choose not to use layers and just draw and add everything that you want onto your canvas and edit as you will. And you'd be using it similarly to how many other design programs are used. The problem is when you want to change something, everything is pretty much in the same space, so you have to undo everything that you've done to go back. That is destructive editing because you have to undo a lot of your work, right? So I highly recommend using layers as a way to put different edits on different layers of your canvas. That makes sense, because then it allows you to work on edits separately. So let's take a look practically at how this works. I'm just gonna go back to my blank canvas. So whenever you start a new project or open an image, you should see one layer in your layers menu. Right now, we see the white square and it says this is our background. There's a little lock on it. These layers are fully editable by us. So I'm gonna unlock the layer by unclicking the lock icon. And I'm gonna double click, it changed the name to layer 0, and we could change this to whatever we'd like. So now I have one layer named my project. There's a little plus button at the bottom of our layers menu to create a new layer. You guys can see it down there, the little plus icon. And every time you click that, you will see a new layer open. Now I have 4 layers and my bottom layer. So let's do the same thing we were doing before. Actually, I want to show you guys how this works with a photo. So I'm gonna open a new project with an image. Give me just 1 second. Okay, so you guys can just observe for this part. Once it opens. There we go. So let's say I have this photo here, and I'd like to add some things to it. Maybe I want to paint on it and add some text. So I will add a text box. This is a photo that I took on vacation. So I'm going to add some things. I'm adding text, and now I want to paint on it. Here's my paintbrush. I'm just kind of having fun playing around, adding some different colors and things. Now let's say I want to remove that heart. I could hit undo. We also have an erase tool here in Photoshop. So I'm going to select that erase tool and try to erase it. What is it doing right now? It's erasing everything. It's erasing my photo, everything under it. And that's because all of my paint, the text, everything I've been doing is on the same layer. The text that I added actually went onto its own layer automatically. So if I erase near my text, okay, let me change the color so you guys can see. If I erase next to my text, nothing happens because it's on its own layer. So why do we want to use layers? Because, let me undo all my paint. If I hit that button, add a new layer, and call this my paint layer, now I know this is where I'm going to paint. Grab my paintbrush tool, and I can put some fun shapes on here. Now I have 3 layers. I have my photo, I have my paint, I have my text. If I want to erase my paint, I need to make sure I have the paint layer selected. Go to my erase tool, and it's going to erase only my paint. It's not touching the photo, it's not touching my text. If I select the text tool and erase, oh, actually, you can't use the erase on a text. You would just edit it. If I select my photo and do the erase tool, it's just going to erase the photo and not the paint. So you guys see how with layers, you can put different actions in different spots. This is one form of non-destructive editing because it means you have control over different parts of your project. Make sense? So we'll be using layers multiple times today. So hopefully you guys will get a good feel for how these work. You'll notice there are more buttons at the bottom of our layer menu. We'll be playing with some of these today. There is a trash can, so you could choose to delete a layer all at once. So for example, I wanted to erase my text. I could just select it and hit the trash can, and it will delete that type layer. If it had other type on it, it would have deleted it all at once. So you can delete layers, create new layers, and edit them as needed. One more thing I'll point out, you guys see this little eyeball icon next to the layer? This controls whether that you can see the layer or not. So you can actually turn on and off different parts of your design without deleting them. And you might get an idea of why this is useful later on when we're practicing in the program. But if you want to try that out, if you have multiple layers open, hit that little eyeball and it will turn different parts on and off. Maybe I want to experiment with 2 different colors of paint. So I'm going to make another layer called Paint 2. And on this one, I'm going to use a different color. And I might decide later, you know what, I don't like the pink paint, so I'm just going to turn that off. I don't want to delete it in case I decide I want it later. But right now, I just want the blue. I could turn just the blue off, or I could turn them both off if I decide I don't want the paint anymore. So this is another way that you can add things to your design and then maybe decide you don't need them, but you're not deleting them. You just might be saving them for later. Any questions about layers? Thank you. So as far as what the question in the chat is, what do we recommend goes on a layer? That is a great question. And at the end of the day, it's going to be up to you and your design process, how you choose to organize your layers. So for example, in the chat, they asked, should you put all your text on one layer and then have all your graphics on a different layer, etc. Now, text automatically will create different layers for each text box. So you'll notice that text automatically creates different layers. If I add another text box here, you guys can see I have 2 different layers for the text now. So that's automatic, but with things like graphics or paint, it's going to end up being up to you. And it's a hard question to answer until you've spent some time in the program and figure out what works for you, whether you want to have things all on the same layer or not. I kind of recommend every time you're moving on to another step or a different element of your design to try to put it on a different layer. Because if I, for example, wanted to add like a splatter paint effect, I might decide that I don't want it anymore, but I want to keep my other paint. And so if those were on 2 different layers, I could get rid of one without getting rid of the other. I hope that makes sense. At the end of the day, it's completely up to you. You don't have to use layers. You could just choose to always do something on one. But if you're doing that, then you're kind of using Photoshop in the same way that you might use like the paint tool or GIMP. You're not taking advantage of the full power that it offers you. But it's up to you. You guys hopefully saw an idea of how this contextual taskbar works, because you can see when I select different layers, my options change. When I select type, I can do things like control the font and the size. So keep an eye on that bar and the settings that show up there. Okay. Let's get into having you guys open a photo on your screen so you guys can follow along with me if you haven't been already. So go ahead and go up to File in Photoshop and select Open. And we're going to start, as long as you downloaded the images. Oops, 1 second. We're going to start with the woman JPEG. So as long as you downloaded that, you should see it showing up on your computer. If it's in a zipped folder, you might have to drag and drop the photos out of the folder. That's what I'm having to do on my computer. We are opening up the woman photo. I'm going to wait a moment, make sure we all have that photo up. You might have, yeah. So try that. There's this in a zip folder, so I'm gonna fix that. Now they show up. I'll just so we're going to use this one for the woman. Okay. Is everybody in the room getting up? Still working, maybe? Some people, I'll mention this to my folks online, some people saw an additional screen when they went to open that was a black Photoshop screen. There's a button in the bottom that says on computer, and you would need to click that to see your computer files. My screen is not doing that, so I can't show you. Just waiting and making sure we can all get our photo. Do you guys need help in the back, or are you doing okay? We'll get there. You sure? Okay, just making sure. All right, so we have our photo. You guys look in your layers menu, and you should see that our layer is currently called background. It's locked. I'm going to have you go ahead and click on the lock icon to unlock it. And we're going to rename this layer woman. So let's talk about some of the very basic things you might want to use Photoshop for. If you're interested in photo editing, you might want to do things like adjust brightness and contrast, adjust the color, the tone, the sharpness, the highlights, the shadows, all of our typical photo editing items. And what's really nice about Photoshop is there is a way to make all of those adjustments non-destructive, which means our original image will always remain if we need to go back to it. And all of those edits are going to be adjustable, which means you can come back and change them anytime. And the way we do that is by adding what is called an adjustment layer. You guys are going to go into your layer menu, and we are going to go down to New Adjustment Layer. And you guys will find lots and lots of editing options in here. We have brightness and contrast, exposure, the hue and saturation. Some of these you might not know what they mean, and that's okay. Let's start with a brightness contrast layer. So again, go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and click on Brightness and Contrast. Photoshop will ask you, what do you want to name your new layer? And I usually just save the default name, so you can just hit OK. Now, if you look back in your layers menu, you should see your woman layer and a new layer called brightness contrast. In our properties window, you should see sliders for brightness and contrast. And we can now adjust these and you can see them adjust your image. So go ahead and brighten it up a little bit if you'd like. I'm going to brighten this image to about, I'm setting the slider to about 30. Now I'm going to go about my day and add some additional elements. So let's just say I added a text box on top of here. You don't have to do this. I just want to demonstrate for you guys. I have some text. I've moved on. I'm on a completely different part of my photo. And I decide, actually, this image still isn't bright enough. I need to go back and make some more adjustments. I can go back and adjust anytime by finding that brightness contrast layer. And if you, if you select it, so just click on that brightness contrast layer. Once again, in your properties, you'll see those sliders again, and you can continue to adjust. So this is a non-destructive filter. Our original photo is still there. If I wanted to, I could turn the eyeball off for my filter, and I can see how my original photo looked. I could delete that filter at any time and decide my original looked better. So that is just one example of a filter you might want to add. I turned my brightness way up, so let's go ahead and just set that back down. Maybe we want to add another filter as well. So go ahead and leave your brightness filter the way it is. I'm going to delete these other layers I have in here. Okay, let's go back to layer and adjustment layer. And try adding a hue saturation layer now. Once again, we're just going to hit OK for our new layer. And your properties window has changed. Now you see sliders for the hue. That's going to control the overall hue of the photo. It will control saturation and lightness. So depending on which adjustment layers you add, you can control different parts of your photo. Here's a quick tip. Most of the time when you are adding adjustments, you hardly need to move these sliders at all, because just a tiny bit of movement is going to pack a punch. And most of the time, your photos don't need drastic saturation, right? This looks kind of crazy. So most of the time, we're going to use it for very small increments. You know, think maybe like +10, -10 at a time and see what difference it makes. We go back to our layers menu. You guys should see 3 choices now. 3 layers. You've got your original photo, your hue, and your brightness contrast. So like I was mentioning earlier, sometimes the layers are automatic. And so to an extent, Photoshop is helping you organize them. Other times you might have to make that decision if you're going to add a new layer or not. So those were our adjustment layers. There are lots of options in there, so lots of things to play around with, and I can't show you all of them today, but just keep in mind that if you ever want to make photo adjustments, an adjustment layer is probably your best bet. We're going to open a different photo now. You guys might have noticed that we have tabs at the top of our workspace now. You should still have a tab for your original 5x5 canvas, and you should have a tab for your woman photo. So as you continue opening images in Photoshop, you can switch between your different projects. And these are all separate files, so they each have their own name. Just keep that in mind. So go back up to File, Open, and now we're going to open the sunset image. So I've got a new tab now. Here's my woman photo, and then we have our sunset. Now this photo, I love the sky, but the rest of my mid and foreground is kind of dark. So let's talk about how we can do selective editing in Photoshop. This is a big part of the power of photo editing when there's one part we want to keep and one part we want to get rid of. The first thing I want to have you guys do is straighten this photo, because right now you might notice it is crooked. To straighten, you're going to use the crop tool. It is 5th from the top, looks like a little box. With the crop tool selected, you can easily resize photos. So if you wanted to trim a little bit off the edge, you could do that with the crop tool. We can also use the crop tool to rotate. So if I hover my mouse outside the edge of my photo now, I can rotate and we get these handy grid lines. So I can see that I want to make that horizon line straight. While you're in the middle of rotating, it will make your image look kind of pixelated. And once you hit enter on your keyboard, you'll notice that pixelation goes away. So if it ever looks pixely, it's probably just because it's in the middle of doing something. Once you apply your action, you should see the full quality come back. So I've straightened my image. I might choose to crop it further. I want to bring it in on the side here. Just clean up the edges a bit and hit enter when you're done. Now, if I decided that I wanted to go back, you guys notice what happened? I cropped our image and now the pixels are gone. So this is a great example. Again, I'm going to undo my changes now of how it would have been helpful to have made a new layer. So let me open up my history. I'm going to go back to my original image. If you open up your history panel, go back to that first action when we opened our photo. And now, instead of jumping straight into crop, I'm going to right click and duplicate my layer. And it's asking what we want to name it. I'm just going to call it background copy, hit OK. Now we have 2. And I'm going to make those crops on my copy. So make sure your copy layer is selected, hit that crop tool again. Once again, we can make those changes. But you should be able to, if you need to, delete that and have your image again. Oh, maybe not. I'm sorry, I think I'm doing this the wrong way. That's all right. We're going to just keep going. You guys know how to crop and straighten. That's fine for now. What I really want to show you guys is this selective editing process. So I want just my house here to be brighter. I'm okay with the rest of the image, but this looks very dark, doesn't it? One of the powerful tools in Photoshop are selection tools. And there are quite a few of them. I'm in the toolbar now, and third from the top, the selection brush tool is there. If I click and hold it, I see many more selection tools underneath it. I am in the toolbar on the left side, and then the third from the top is the selection brush. Just underneath that are more selection tools. So for me, object selection is on top. You guys might see something else like the quick selection or the magic wand. So what are all of these? There's a bunch of options. Selection tools allow you to select just a small part of your canvas, of your image. There are lots of different ways you can make selections. Lots of choices. Right now, I'm going to have you guys use this object selection tool because this is really cool. It's fourth from the top, and if you need to click and hold on it to see the full panel, click on object selection tool. This is powered by Photoshop, and it's automatically recognizing the different areas of our photo. It's doing its best. And when it selects an area, it shows an overlay of pink, magenta. So I can see that it's selecting the house here, and I'm going to click on that. And now you guys can see that, I'm trying to get rid of this menu. Oh, come on. There we go. You guys can see this moving line around of our selection. That's called the marching ants line. You'll hear designers use that term sometimes because it looks like it's moving. So right now we have just selected our house. What might we want to do from here? What I'm going to do is hit Control-C on my keyboard. I'm copying my selection. So just hit Control-C, open a new layer, and hit Control-V. You won't notice anything different in the photo, but if you look on the layer, very small, if you look in that box, you can see that there is actually now that selection, the little house. And with the layer one, my new layer selected, I'm going to switch to the Move tool. That's this very top tool at the top here, the Move tool. You can use the Move tool to click and move different parts of your image. I can move around this little copy of the house that I made if I wanted to. So if you wanted to duplicate a part of your image, you could select it, copy and paste it to a new layer, and then move it around and place it. Sure. I'm going to let you guys play with moving that around while I go help someone. Now, if we switch to your view, it's here. You just can't see it. Try moving. Oh, there. That takes it off. Yeah. So now you see. So that's how you could duplicate. Okay. Go ahead and put it. Hit undo. Okay. Undo. Oh my God. Try hitting it one more time. Just hit Control-Z until it goes back. There you go. Okay, so you guys should now have your background, your original photo, and then our new little house on top of it. With our layer one selected, I'm gonna rename this house so that I remember what's on here. So now I have my background photo and I have just my house. Let's do the same thing we did before and add an adjustment layer to control brightness. Do you guys remember where that was? layer, new adjustment layer. And I'm gonna play with the exposure. So I'm gonna add a new exposure adjustment layer. And we'll hit OK. Now in our properties window, we can play with our exposure, but you'll notice something. It's still doing the whole photo. When I play with this, I didn't want to apply it to the whole photo, right? Because I don't need to overexpose the sky. I want the house brighter, but now my sky looks crazy. So look in your layers menu. You should have 3 layers if you've been following along: your background image, the house, and this new exposure layer. Right now, I want the exposure filter to only show for my house. So we're going to do a special trick right now to tie these two together. Hold Alt on your computer. If you're using a Mac, I believe it would be the Option key. If you hold Alt, position your cursor right between the 2 layers, and you should see it turn into this box with the arrow. And when you click, once you see that little dot symbol, the box with the arrow, when you click, it has added an arrow here, which symbolizes that this filter is now tied just to this layer. You guys see the little arrow? Should have added. And now when I go into properties to adjust the exposure, do you guys see it's only applying to the house? Now I don't need to crazy overexpose this, but I just want to pull it up a little bit. I might also decide to add a brightness contrast layer, and I could do the exact same thing. I could add that adjustment and then tie it just to the house, and then those corrections only affect that one part. Pretty cool when you just have one part of your image that's overexposed, underexposed. You could use it to change the coloring. There's lots of cool things you could do. I want to show you guys another quick way to add an adjustment layer. So go ahead and click on your house again, the house layer, I mean. Make sure that is selected. And at the bottom of the layers menu, remember how I said there are buttons down here? The button right in the middle will allow you to create a new adjustment layer. So this is a quick way to get there, to that list of adjustments. And now I'm going to choose to try out let's just try out the color balance. So I clicked the add new adjustment layer button. It looks like a circle with a line through it. We'll add a new color balance. When you add it that way, it usually automatically ties the layer adjustment to the layer you're working on. So you guys can see this automatically has the arrow on it. It did it for me since I added it right here from the layers menu. So that is a quick way to avoid having to tie the filter the way we did. But just keep in mind always that you can hold Alt and hover to attach things, because that's going to be very useful when you're trying to make these selective edits. And now I'm going to click on that color balance layer, go into properties, and I can play with the color of the house now if I want. Looks kind of crazy, but maybe I want the house to be, green instead of white, or I could play around here. That is the basics of the selective editing. Ooh, there we go. Which is using those selection tools, selecting a part of your photo, adding those adjustment layers. There's lots more you can do with this, obviously, but this is just kind of the basic building blocks of selecting some individual parts for editing. All right, obviously we could spend more time on this, but I'm going to switch gears now and show you guys some other tools in Photoshop that people use all the time, and those are the healing and remove tools. So these are really, really useful for folks who want to correct photos, remove blemishes, remove scars, remove dust. Like there's a million uses for these tools. So just like before, we're going to go to File and Open. And I'm going to have you guys open our smoothing skin photo. So we're going to look now at the magic of Photoshop for removing blemishes, correcting skin. This is something a lot of people use this tool for. Let's start out with the heal and remove tools. So they live in the toolbar, just like everything else. And you should see a little Band-Aid, which represents the healing section. There's lots of tools in here. I believe the spot healing brush will show on top, which is this little Band-Aid in front of a dashed circle. The spot healing brush is super useful for removing blemishes in particular, things like moles, pimples, skin irregularities. It can remove lots of other things as well. So go ahead and select that spot healing brush tool. And right now my brush is really, really small. It just looks like this tiny little dot. So go up to the control panel. You should see a number there. Mine says 19. There's a drop down to adjust your size. And I'm going to make this a bit larger, maybe closer to 70. You guys can see your brush getting larger. You know, you can make it huge if you want. Do not recommend. So we have it at about 70. I'll click outside of that menu and let's see some magic happen. Position that cursor right around one of those blemishes and click. And you should just see it disappear. The spot healing tool works best if you size it for the blemish you're trying to remove, but no larger. So for example, this one right here, I'm noticing is just a little bigger than my brush. So I'm gonna up it a little bit. And then we'll try it. Pretty neat, right? Almost instantaneously, you can quickly correct some of those irregularities in the photo. Now, once again, I have been editing the original photo right now. So like before, it's always a good idea to duplicate and be working on a copy. Now, if you want to absolutely erase your blemishes from history, I mean, go for it. But keeping that original is a good idea in case you over edit and over remove and want to be able to go back. Yes, you have another question? I must have. Oh, I do. So what are you trying to, oh, you're not in layers. You're in something. I don't challenge did that. I think it accidentally closed. Do you remember where I told you guys you can go if one of your, that's. So funny. And then find layers. And that's all you have to do to freeze. Open it. Okay, now it's over here. If you want it to live in here, clicking, drag it. So yeah. And now it's there.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So I go to window.
Yeah. If it closes, you can.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hopefully you all are having fun with the spot healing brush. That is just one of the many remove tools. So there are others in here. I'm not going to get into all of it right now. Each of them does a slightly different thing and might work better in some circumstances over others. But I use the spot healing brush the most. It's very useful, again, for blemishes. It's useful for removing dust. If you've scanned an image or scanned photos and there's like little dust motes, you can use it to remove those. So lots of different ways you could choose to apply it. Now I want to show you guys some more of the power of Photoshop up in the filters section. There is one filter in particular that is brand new that works really, really well if you're trying to correct skin. This is in what's called the neural filters section. These are brand new in Photoshop, and some of them are still in the beta stage. So that's filter, neural filters. You'll see this large new window open up. It's telling you that you can do lots of different things with the neural filters. But the very first one we see is this skin smoothing option. You do have to download these filters, so they are going to take up memory. So if you don't want to worry about that right now, you don't have to. I just want to show you guys how it works. So I'm going to download it on my end. There are some other really cool filters in here. These are mostly powered by AI, so they can do some really cool, powerful things. I've downloaded the skin smoothing filter, and now I have two adjusters. I can play with what's called the blur and the smoothness. Now I just upped the blur just a tiny bit, and you should be able to see that it has really smoothed out the skin. I'm going to do the same thing with smoothness, just a few points up. And I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm going to hit OK. It's applied that filter onto the copy. So let's look at this compared to the original. Pretty nice. And that was with one click using the skin smoothing filter. So play around and explore those filters if you'd like, because they can really speed up the process for you. Sometimes you might still need to go in with that spot healing tool and maybe touch up areas if you want. But if you're interested in like a one click, those filters are really, really nice. There are a lot of other filters in here. I'm going to show you more of these when we're playing with a different photo. But lots to explore in the filter menu. Okay. This spot healing removing tool, just to give you guys an idea of some of the other things you could use it for, I'm not going to have you open this image with me, but if you, for example, had old historic photos that you wanted to scan onto your computer and retouch, you could use, once again, the spot healing brush to remove things like dust and scratches. You see how it's doing it just automatically? That wasn't great. It's just getting rid of a lot of these. So you could spend a lot of time retouching photos as needed.
Can you hold down and drag it?
You can't hold down and drag with the spot healing brush, but you can do that with things like the remove tool. Well, maybe you can actually. Here, let's see. Why are you giving me trouble? Let's try it. Oh, you're right. You can. You've corrected me. My apologies. So I'm using the spot healing right now to remove the lines. Now, it's not always perfect. This is a highly patterned background, so I might want to use a different tool to recolor here. But that spot healing brush will get you a long, long way. Pretty cool, right? I'll point out as well that there is a filter for colorizing old black and white photos, Again, it uses AI to do this. It's called the Colorize filter. But if you wanted to play around and have fun, like with your old photos or your parents' old photos, you could really easily use some of these filters to do that. That one's called Colorize. All right, let's keep moving. And I'm going to have you guys open the cat photo. Now, you guys are going to have an activity for the second half of our workshop where you're practicing a lot of these tools I'm showing you on your own with step-by-step instructions. And so I want to finish showing you some of the different tools you're going to be using for that. Right now, we have our original layer. I'm going to unlock this and duplicate it. Go ahead and hold on to our original. Now we have our copy. And if you'd like, you can rename these layers to cat. And we'll call the copy cat copy. If you need to zoom in and out of your image, you can use the zoom tool that is in the toolbar. You can also use the Control plus and Control minus on your keyboard to do the same thing. So if you hold Control plus, Control minus, it will zoom in and out. So let's start with adding some fun shapes and text to our image. Let's talk about like more than just photo editing, but actually creating something new and fun. I want to play around with adding text and shapes. So I'm going to select my cat copy layer. And you're going to select the type tool, which I've been showing off as we go through this demo. You go ahead and select the type tool. The first thing it's going to do is let you drag and drop a text box. So if you click and drag your cursor, and then release, it will create a text box for you filled with lorem ipsum, like filler text. And you can just start typing to replace it. This is my cat Mose, so I'm just gonna title the photo Mose the cat. And to make changes, you can use either the contextual taskbar, which should show up just under the text bar, or in the properties menu. If you have text selected, the properties menu will have a ton of additional text edit features. And you can highlight the text and change it. There's hundreds of fonts in here, lots of choices. So you could do something fun. Play around with the size. And the color. If you want to move the text, right now I still have the text tool selected. And so if I try to move this, it's just going to click on it and open up the text edit menu. So anytime you want to move something, you need to select the move tool. That's something part of Photoshop that kind of trips people up is if it's ever not doing what you want it to do, make sure you're on the right tool. And make sure you have the right layer selected. Those are usually the two big, like first places I check if it's not behaving. What tool is selected? What layer am I on? But with the move tool selected, I can kind of reposition this where I would like. And now I want to add a shape behind my text. So I'm going to use the shape tool. That's towards the bottom of our toolbar menu. It defaults to the rectangle, but if you click and hold, you'll see you have lots of other shapes. We have an ellipse option, that's a circle for the ellipse. We have a triangle, polygon. You could make your own custom shape. I'm just going to do the ellipse tool and draw a circle. and I kind of want it going off of my canvas. Now, if you guys have played around in Express at all, you're familiar with this concept of stacking items on top of one another. Right now, my shape is on top of the text. It's blocking out the text. And I can rearrange how things stack and show by rearranging the layers. So if I pull my new ellipse layer underneath the text layer, now the text is on top and it's readable. So now I've got a shape, I've got some text, I'm having some fun with my photo here, but maybe I want to adjust even more, and I want to remove the background from this image and put Mose the cat somewhere new. So we're going to go back again and use one of those tools we already played with, the selection tools, in order to do that. Make sure you have the cat copy layer selected. And I am going to use the object selection tool once again. If I were to do magic wand, that might work. Again, all of these are just different options of trying to make selections, but some of them work better than others. For example, right now I'm trying to use the magic wand and it's not doing a very good job of getting the entire cat. You can see it's just pulling out little bits of his fur. And that's probably because all of the values in this photo are so close together, it just can't really tell with this tool what I want. So the object selection tool will work the best. Again, that's 4 from the top. Make sure it's set to object selection. And now I can really easily select the background or select the cat. I'm going to select the cat. And that has done a great job, right? So now we have that marching ants line. And right now the selection is around our kitty. You can also really easily use this tool and then do an inverse selection by going to select and inverse. And now it's grabbing the rest of the image, the background. I could have used the object selection tool to grab the background, but you'll notice it wasn't perfect. You can see that there were some areas that it wasn't selecting. So when I selected the cat and then did select inverse, it did a better job of selecting that entire background. So let's make some magic happen here in Photoshop. We're going to tell Photoshop to hide part of our photo. I don't actually want to delete the photo right now. I just want to hide part of it. And so this is something that's used in Photoshop all the time. It's called a layer mask. So in your layers menu, if you have that open, the button that kind of looks like, I think it looks like a camera, but it's a square with a circle taken out of the middle. This is the layer mask button. And what a mask does is when you have something selected and then choose to mask it, it's going to make it disappear and whatever was behind it is going to show through. Now, if we were to add that mask right now, you're not going to notice a change because there's another image of our cat right behind it that's exactly the same. However, now we can pull in another image. We could pull in a backdrop if we want, or another photo. Wherever we want to put our cat, we can pull in here and it would show through. So let's go ahead and do that. You should see the layer mask show up in your layers menu, and you can tell it's masked because there's this new box next to the photo, and you can see the black and white shades. The black represents everything that is showing in your image, and the white represents everything that's not showing. So let's put in a fun background, and what we are going to do, instead of File, Open, we're going to try something different. We're going to go to File, Place, Embedded. And this is going to allow us to open another photo in the project we're working on right now. So go to File, Place, Embedded, and choose the space photo. Let's put Moe's the cat in space. Select your photo, hit place, and you should see your new image show up in your workspace. If it doesn't automatically show up, it might show up next to your cursor and you have to click and drag to place it. So the first thing we're going to do is make this bigger so it fits the entire canvas. So you can blow that up and position it where you'd like. And let's look at our layers menu. The space background is on top of both of our cat images, and we want space to be behind our little masked kitty. So I'm going to just lower it 1. And so now you guys can see space and part of the cat image. And we actually reversed it. So it's showing us the wrong part of our image right now. Right now, our mask is showing us through the cat, and all we can see is the background. We want to flip this. So I'm just going to actually delete this mask. Go ahead and click the layer mask. You're just going to hit the black and white box and hit delete. And let's try that again. Use your object selection tool, select the cat, and we're not going to do the inverse. I'm sorry, I got that backwards. We're just going to select the cat and add that layer mask. And now you should be able to see the space background come through. Now, the little mask that I did of our kitty isn't perfect. The edges, if I were to zoom in, don't look wonderful. And I could continue to play with this if I'd like. If I click on that mask, the black and white mask box, and go into properties, you'll notice that you can play around and edit the mask a little bit. You could choose to feather the edges slightly, and that will make the edge of the cat appear less harsh and a little softer. And it might just look a little more like he's actually a part of this image instead of like clipped on top of it. I'm just playing with the feather and properties. So there are little tweaks you can make. You could further refine it by going into the select and mask section, and there are a lot more sliders you could play around with in here. So hopefully you guys are getting a good idea. Obviously, there's a whole lot of buttons and a lot of other things we're not looking at, but we very quickly removed or masked the background. It's still there. You could choose to delete that mask at any time. You could turn off the mask and the space image and bring back your original photo. So again, working with the layers and making sure that you're doing those non-destructive edits, you can really play around and have some fun manipulating images. All right, really quickly, I want you guys to have some hands-on practice time where you can ask questions and be experimenting on your own, because I find that I learn the best when I'm actually spending some time figuring it out myself. But let's learn how to save a project and how to export it out of Photoshop when we're done. So at any time you can go to File and Save to save your project as a Photoshop file. I usually, if you want to rename it, go to Save As, and that will allow you to save the file on your computer. You can choose whatever name you want, and you'll notice that it's going to save it as a Photoshop file. That means every time you go back to that project, it's going to open it back up in Photoshop so you can keep editing and keep working on it. Several of you mentioned that you were interested in how you can use Photoshop with Express. While you're here in the Save menu, if you save your file to the cloud, it will automatically load it into your Express projects for you. So if you've never used Express before and you're not sure what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. But if you want this project to show up in your Express, save it to the cloud. You can see I have an earlier version in here. And then you'll be able to open up Express and you could keep working on it there if you wanted to. Let's say we're done working on it in Photoshop and I want a picture of this so I can post on my Facebook because I just had a ton of fun making this little poster of my cat and I want to put it on social media. You can't put a Photoshop file on Facebook. Won't work. What you have to do is export it into a different file format like a JPEG or a PNG. You have lots of choices. So you want to go to File and Export when you're ready to get it out of Photoshop. And I always do Export As because it's going to give you lots of options on your file settings. So from here, you can choose whether you want it to be a GIF, a JPEG, or a PNG. JPEG is best if you're going to work with like a small image that you're planning to put on, if you're planning on printing it out, putting it in a doc. Social media, JPEG would be fine. If you're planning on putting it on a web page or a website, PNG is better for digital images, just if you're curious between the two. But I could just really easily say, I want this as a JPEG. I'm not going to worry about the other settings. And I'm going to hit export. Let me make this a little smaller. Hit export. Now I can put it on my computer as a JPEG, and now I could post this on social media if I wanted to.